Good evening, and thank you for joining me for another Boring Books for Bedtime. I hope tonight's selection provides all the boredom your busy brain needs to quiet down and let you get some sleep. Before we begin, I'd like to give a special shout out of thanks to some new members of our Patreon family: Jean, Joe, Jane, and Brianna. Thank you all so much for supporting this podcast. By becoming members of Patreon, you help us remain 100% listener-supported and ad-free for everyone, and it's very much appreciated. If you're interested in supporting Boring Books for Bedtime and learning more about the perks available to subscribers, including exclusive episodes heard nowhere else, you'll find a link to Patreon in the show description. You'll also find a link to buymeacoffee.com, where you can support us with a one-time tip, no subscription required. I hope you'll take a moment to check them out. Now, let's read and relax. Find a comfortable spot. Adjust your volume. Take a nice deep breath in. Let it out slowly. And off we go. Tonight we're returning to a work considered to be the earliest surviving piece on dramatic theory, written around 335 BC, the Poetics by Aristotle, in an English translation from the 19th century by S.H. Butcher. Let's pick up right where we left off quite a long time ago. Chapter 15. In respect of character, there are 4 things to be aimed at. First and most important, it must be good. Now, any speech or action that manifests moral purpose of any kind will be expressive of character. The character will be good if the purpose is good. This rule is relative to each class. Even a woman may be good, and also a slave, though the woman may be said to be an inferior being, and the slave quite worthless. The second thing to aim at is propriety. There is a type of manly valor, but valor in a woman or unscrupulous cleverness is inappropriate. Thirdly, character must be true to life, for this is a distinct thing from goodness and propriety, as here described. The fourth point is consistency, for though the subject of the imitation who suggested the type be inconsistent, still he must be consistently inconsistent. As an example of motiveless degradation of character, we have Menelaus in the Orestes. Of character indecorous and inappropriate, the lament of Odysseus in the Scylla, and the speech of Melanippe. Of inconsistency, the Iphigenia at Aulis, for Iphigenia the suppliant in no way resembles her later self. As in the structure of the plot, so too in the portraiture of character, the poet should always aim either at the necessary or the probable. Thus a person of a given character should speak or act in a given way, by the rule either of necessity or of probability, just as this event should follow that by necessary or probable sequence. It is therefore evident that the unraveling of the plot, no less than the complication, must arise out of the plot itself. It must not be brought about by the deus ex machina, as in the Medea or in the return of the Greeks in the Iliad. The deus ex machina should be employed only for events external to the drama, for antecedent or subsequent events which lie beyond the range of human knowledge, and which require to be reported or foretold. For to the gods we ascribe the power of seeing all things. Within the action, there must be nothing irrational. If the irrational cannot be excluded, it should be outside the scope of the tragedy. Such is the irrational element in the Oedipus of Sophocles. Again, since tragedy is an imitation of persons who are above the common level, the example of good portrait painters should be followed. They, while reproducing the distinctive form of the original, make a likeness which is true to life, and yet more beautiful. So too the poet, in representing men who are irascible or indolent, or have other defects of character, should preserve the type, and yet ennoble it. In this way Achilles is portrayed by Agathon and Homer. These, then, are rules the poet should observe, nor should he neglect those appeals to the senses, which, though not among the essentials, are the concomitants of poetry, for here too there is much room for error. But of this enough has been said in our published treatises. 16. What recognition is has been already explained. We will now enumerate its kinds. First, the least artistic form, which from poverty of wit is most commonly employed, recognition by signs. Of these some are congenital, such as the spear which the earth-born race bear on their bodies, or the stars introduced by Carcinus in his Thyestes. Others are acquired after birth, and of these some are bodily marks, as scars, some external tokens, as necklaces, or the little arc in the tyro by which the discovery is effected. Even these admit of more or less skillful treatment. Thus, in the recognition of Odysseus by his scar, the discovery is made in one way by the nurse, in another by the swineherds. The use of tokens for the express purpose of proof, and indeed any formal proof with or without tokens, is a less artistic mode of recognition. A better kind is that which comes about by a turn of incident, as in the bath scene in the Odyssey. Next come the recognitions invented at will by the poet, and on that account wanting in art. For example, Orestes in the Iphigenia reveals the fact that he is Orestes. She indeed makes herself known by the letter, but he by speaking himself and saying what the poet, not what the plot requires. This therefore is nearly allied to the fault above mentioned, for Orestes might as well have brought tokens with him. Another similar instance is the voice of the shuttle in the Tereus of Sophocles. The third kind depends on memory, when the sight of some object awakens a feeling, as in the Cyprians of Diogenes, where the hero breaks into tears on seeing the picture, or again in the Lay of Alcinous, where Odysseus, hearing the minstrel play the lyre, recalls the past and weeps, and hence the recognition. The fourth kind is by process of reasoning. Thus, in the Coephori, someone resembling me has come, No one resembles me but Orestes, therefore Orestes has come. Such, too, is the discovery made by Iphigenia in the play of Polyidus the Sophist. It was a natural reflection for Orestes to make. So I too must die at the altar like my sister. So again in the Tydeus of Theodectes, the father says, I came to find my son, and I lose my own life. So too in the Phinidae, the women on seeing the place inferred their fate. Here we are doomed to die, for here we were cast forth. Again, there is a composite kind of recognition involving false inference on the part of one of the characters, as in the Odysseus disguised as a messenger. A said that no one else was able to bend the bow. Hence B, the disguised Odysseus, imagined that A would recognize the bow, which in fact he had not seen, and to bring about a recognition by this means that the expectation A would recognize the bow is false inference. But of all recognitions, the best is that which arises from the incidents themselves, where the startling discovery is made by natural means. Such is that in the Oedipus of Sophocles, and in the Iphigenia, for it was natural that Iphigenia should wish to dispatch a letter. These recognitions alone dispense with the artificial aid of tokens or amulets. Next come the recognitions by process of reasoning. 17. In constructing the plot and working it out with the proper diction, the poet should place the scene as far as possible before his eyes. In this way, seeing everything with the utmost vividness, as if he were a spectator of the action, he will discover what is in keeping with it, and be most unlikely to overlook inconsistencies. The need of such a rule is shown by the fault found in Carcinus. Amphiaraus was on his way from the temple. This fact escaped the observation of one who did not see the situation. On the stage, however, the piece failed, the audience being offended at the oversight. Again, the poet should work out his play to the best of his power with appropriate gestures, for those who feel emotion are most convincing through natural sympathy with the characters they represent, and one who is agitated storms. One who is angry rages with the most lifelike reality. Hence, poetry implies either a happy gift of nature or a strain of madness. In the one case, a man can take the mold of any character. In the other, he is lifted out of his proper self. As for the story, whether the poet takes it ready-made or constructs it for himself, he should first sketch its general outline, and then fill in the episodes and amplify in detail. The general plan may be illustrated by the Iphigenia. A young girl is sacrificed. She disappears mysteriously from the eyes of those who sacrificed her. She is transported to another country, where the custom is to offer up all strangers to the goddess. To this ministry she is appointed. Some time later, her own brother chances to arrive. The fact that the oracle for some reason ordered him to go there is outside the general plan of the play. The purpose again of his coming is outside the action proper. However, he comes. He is seized, and when on the point of being sacrificed, reveals who he is. The mode of recognition may be either that of Euripides or of Polyidus, in whose play he exclaims very naturally, "So it was not my sister only, but I too, who was doomed to be sacrificed." And by that remark he is saved. After this, the names being once given, it remains to fill in the episodes. We must see that they are relevant to the action. In the case of Orestes, for example, there is the madness which led to his capture and his deliverance by means of the purification rite. In the drama, the episodes are short, but it is these that give extension to epic poetry. Thus, the story of the Odyssey can be stated briefly. A certain man is absent from home for many years. He is jealously watched by Poseidon and left desolate. Meanwhile, his home is in a wretched plight. Suitors are wasting his substance and plotting against his son. At length, tempest-tossed, he himself arrives. He makes certain persons acquainted with him. He attacks the suitors with his own hand, and is himself preserved while he destroys them. This is the essence of the plot. The rest is episode. 18. Every tragedy falls into two parts: complication and unraveling or denouement. Incidents extraneous to the action are frequently combined with a portion of the action proper to form the complication. The rest is the unraveling. By the complication, I mean all that extends from the beginning of the action to the part which marks the turning point to good or bad fortune. The unraveling is that which extends from the beginning of the change to the end. Thus, in the Lynceus of Theodectes, the complication consists of the incidents presupposed in the drama, the seizure of the child, and then again, the unraveling extends from the accusation of murder to the end. There are four kinds of tragedy: the complex, depending entirely on reversal of the situation and recognition; the pathetic, where the motive is passion, such as the tragedies of Ajax and Ixion; the ethical, where the motives are ethical, such as the Phthiotides and the Peleus. The fourth kind is the simple. We here exclude the purely spectacular element, exemplified by the Phorcides, the Prometheus, and scenes laid in Hades. The poet should endeavor, if possible, to combine all poetic elements, or failing that, the greatest number and those the most important. The more so in face of the caviling criticism of the day. For whereas there have hitherto been good poets, each in his own branch, the critics now expect one man to surpass all others in their several lines of excellence. In speaking of a tragedy as the same or different, the best test to take is the plot. Identity exists where the complication and unraveling are the same. Many poets tie the knot well, but unravel it ill. Both arts, however, should always be mastered. Again, the poet should remember what has been often said: and not make an epic structure into a tragedy. By an epic structure, I mean one with a multiplicity of plots, as if, for instance, you were to make a tragedy out of the entire story of the Iliad. In the epic poem, owing to its length, each part assumes its proper magnitude. In the drama, the result is far from answering to the poet's expectation. The proof is that the poets who have dramatized the whole story of the fall of Troy, instead of selecting portions like Euripides, or who have taken the whole tale of Niobe and not a part of her story, like Aeschylus, either fail utterly or meet with poor success on the stage. Even Agathon has been known to fail from this one defect. In his reversals of the situation, however, he shows a marvelous skill in the effort to hit the popular taste, to produce a tragic effect that satisfies the moral sense. This effect is produced when the clever rogue, like Sisyphus, is outwitted, or the brave villain defeated. Such an event is probable in Agathon's sense of the word. It is probable, he says, that many things should happen contrary to probability. The chorus, too, should be regarded as one of the actors. It should be an integral part of the whole and share in the action, in the manner not of Euripides, but of Sophocles. As for the later poets, their choral songs pertain as little to the subject of the piece as to that of any other tragedy. They are therefore sung as mere interludes, a practice first begun by Agathon. Yet what difference is there between introducing such choral interludes and transferring a speech, or even a whole act, from one play to another? 19. It remains to speak of diction and thought, the other parts of tragedy having been already discussed. Concerning thought, we may assume what is said in the rhetoric, to which inquiry the subject more strictly belongs. Under thought is included every effect which has to be produced by speech, the subdivisions being proof and refutation, the excitation of the feelings, such as pity, fear, anger, and the like, the suggestion of importance or its opposite. Now, it is evident that the dramatic incidents must be treated from the same points of view as the dramatic speeches, when the object is to evoke the sense of pity, fear, importance, or probability. The only difference is that the incidents should speak for themselves without verbal exposition, while the effects aimed at in speech should be produced by the speaker and as a result of the speech. For what were the business of a speaker if the thought were revealed quite apart from what he says? Next, as regards diction. One branch of the inquiry treats of the modes of utterance, but this province of knowledge belongs to the art of delivery and to the masters of that science. It includes, for instance, what is a command, a prayer, a statement, a threat, a question, an answer, and so forth. To know or not to know these things involves no serious censure upon the poet's art, for who can admit the fault imputed to Homer by Protagoras, that in the words, "Sing, goddess of the wrath," He gives a command under the idea that he utters a prayer. For to tell someone to do a thing or not to do it is, he says, a command. We may therefore pass this over as an inquiry that belongs to another art, not to poetry. 20. Language in general includes the following parts: letter, syllable, connecting word, noun, verb, inflection or case, sentence or phrase. A letter is an indivisible sound, yet not every such sound, but only one which can form part of a group of sounds. For even brutes utter indivisible sounds, none of which I call a letter. The sound I mean may be either a vowel, a semi-vowel, or a mute. A vowel is that which without impact of tongue or lip has an audible sound. A semi-vowel, that which with such impact has an audible sound, as S and R. A mute, that which with such impact has by itself no sound, but joined to a vowel sound becomes audible, as G and D. These are distinguished according to the form assumed by the mouth and the place where they are produced. According as they are aspirated or smooth, long or short, as they are acute, grave, or of an indeterminate tone, which inquiry belongs in detail to the writers on meter. A syllable is a non-significant sound composed of a mute and a vowel. For gr without a is a syllable, as also with a, gra. But the investigation of these differences belongs also to metrical science. A connecting word is a non-significant sound which neither causes nor hinders the union of many sounds into one significant sound. It may be placed at either end or in the middle of a sentence, or a non-significant sound which out of several sounds, each of them significant, is capable of forming one significant sound, or a non-significant sound which marks the beginning, end, or division of a sentence, such, however, that it cannot correctly stand by itself at the beginning of a sentence. A noun is a composite significant sound, not marking time, of which no part is in itself significant. For in double or compound words, we do not employ the separate parts, as if each were in itself significant. Thus, in Theodorus, God-given, or gift, is not in itself significant. A verb is a composite significant sound marking time, in which, as in the noun, no part is in itself significant. For man or white does not express the idea of when, but he walks or he has walked does connote time, present or past. Inflection belongs both to the noun and verb, and expresses either the relation of, to, or the like, or that of number, whether one or many, as man or men, or the modes or tones in actual delivery, like a question or a command. Did he go, and go are verbal inflections of this kind. A sentence or phrase is a composite significant sound, some at least of whose parts are in themselves significant. for not every such group of words consists of verbs and nouns. The definition of man, for example, but it may dispense even with the verb. Still, it will always have some significant part, as in walking, or Cleon, son of Cleon. A sentence or phrase may form a unity in two ways, either as signifying one thing or as consisting of several parts linked together. Thus the Iliad is won by the linking together of parts, the definition of man by the unity of the thing signified. 21. Words are of two kinds, simple and double. By simple, I mean those composed of non-significant elements. By double or compound, those composed either of a significant and non-significant element, though within the whole word no element is significant, or of elements that are both significant. A word may likewise be triple, quadruple, or multiple in form, like so many Massilian expressions, such as Hermokaikoxanthus, who prayed to Father Zeus. Every word is either current, or strange, or metaphorical, or ornamental, or newly coined, or lengthened, or contracted, or altered. By a current or proper word, I mean one which is in general use among a people. By a strange word, one which is in use in another country. Plainly, therefore, the same word may be at once strange and current, but not in relation to the same people. The word lance is to the Cyprians a current term, but to us a strange one. Metaphor is the application of an alien name by transference either from genus to species, or from species to genus, or from species to species, or by analogy, that is, proportion. Thus from genus to species, as, there lies my ship, for lying at anchor is a species of lying. From species to genus, as verily 10,000 noble deeds hath Odysseus wrought, for 10,000 is a species of large number, and is here used for a large number generally. From species to species, as, with blade of bronze drew away the life, and cleft the water with the vessel of unyielding bronze. Here, to draw away is used for to cleave, each being a species of taking away. Analogy or proportion is when the second term is to the first as the fourth to the third. We may then use the fourth for the second, or the second for the fourth. Sometimes, too, we qualify the metaphor by adding the term to which the proper word is relative. Thus the cup is to Dionysus as the shield is to Ares. The cup may, therefore, be called the shield of Dionysus, and the shield the cup of Ares. Or again, as old age is to life, so is evening to day. Evening may therefore be called the old age of the day, and old age the evening of life, or, in the phrase of Empedocles, life's setting sun. For some of the words of the proportion, there is at times no word in existence. Still, the metaphor may be used. For instance, to scatter seed is called sowing, but the action of the sun in scattering his rays is nameless. Still, this process bears to the sun the same relation as sowing to the seed. Hence the expression of the poet, sowing the God-created light. There is another way in which this kind of metaphor may be employed. We may apply an alien term, and then deny of that term one of its proper attributions, as if we were to call the shield not the cup of Aries, but the wineless cup. A newly coined word is one which has never been even in local use, but is adopted by the poet himself. A word is lengthened when its own vowel is exchanged for a longer one, or when a syllable is inserted. A word is contracted when some part of it is removed. An altered word is one in which part of the ordinary form is left unchanged, and part is recast. Nouns in themselves are either masculine, feminine, or neuter. Masculine are such as end in nu, rho, sigma, or in some letter compounded with sigma. Feminine, such as end in vowels that are always long, namely eta and omega, and of vowels that admit of lengthening, those in alpha. Thus, the number of letters in which nouns masculine and feminine end is the same. No noun ends in a mute or a vowel short by nature. 3 only end in iota. 5 end in upsilon. Neuter nouns end in these 2 latter vowels, also in nu and sigma. 22. The perfection of style is to be clear without being mean. The clearest style is that which uses only current or proper words. At the same time, it is mean. Witness the poetry of Cleophon and of Sthenelaus. That diction, on the other hand, is lofty and raised above the commonplace, which employs unusual words. By unusual, I mean strange or rare words, metaphorical, lengthened, anything in short that differs from the normal idiom. Yet a style wholly composed of such words is either a riddle or a jargon. A riddle if it consists of metaphors, a jargon if it consists of strange or rare words. For the essence of a riddle is to express true facts under impossible combinations. Now, this cannot be done by any arrangement of ordinary words, but by the use of metaphor it can. Such is the riddle. A man I saw, who on another man had glued the bronze by aid of fire, and others of the same kind. A diction that is made up of strange or rare terms is a jargon. A certain infusion, therefore, of these elements is necessary to style. For the strange or rare word, the metaphorical, the ornamental, and the other kinds above mentioned will raise it above the commonplace and mean, while the use of proper words will make it perspicuous. But nothing contributes more to produce a clearness of diction that is remote from commonness than the lengthening, contraction, and alteration of words. For by deviating in exceptional cases from the normal idiom, the language will gain distinction, while at the same time the partial conformity with usage will give perspicuity. The critics, therefore, are in error who censure these licenses of speech and hold the author up to ridicule. Thus Euclides the elder declared that it would be an easy matter to be a poet if you might lengthen syllables at will. He caricatured the practice in the very form of his diction. To employ such license at all obtrusively is, no doubt, grotesque, but in any mode of poetic diction there must be moderation. Even metaphors, strange or rare words, or any similar forms of speech would produce the like effect if used without propriety and with the express purpose of being ludicrous. How great a difference is made by the appropriate use of lengthening may be seen in epic poetry by the insertion of ordinary forms in the verse. So again, if we take a strange or rare word, a metaphor, or any similar mode of expression, and replace it by the current or proper term, the truth of our observation will be manifest. For example, Aeschylus and Euripides each composed the same iambic line, but the alteration of a single word by Euripides, who employed the rarer term instead of the ordinary one, makes one verse appear beautiful and the other trivial. Again, Ariphrades ridiculed the tragedians for using phrases which no one would employ in ordinary speech. It is precisely because such phrases are not part of the current idiom that they give distinction to the style. This, however, he failed to see. It is a great matter to observe propriety in these several modes of expression, and also in compound words, strange or rare words, and so forth. But the greatest thing by far is to have a command of metaphor. This alone cannot be imparted by another. It is the mark of genius, for to make good metaphors implies an eye for resemblances. Of the various kinds of words, the compound are best adapted to dithyrambs, rare words to heroic poetry, metaphors to iambic. In heroic poetry, indeed, all these varieties are serviceable, but in iambic verse, which reproduces as far as may be familiar speech, the most appropriate words are those which are found even in prose. These are the current or proper, the metaphorical, and the ornamental. Concerning tragedy and imitation by means of action, this may suffice. 23. As to that poetic imitation which is narrative in form and employs a single meter, the plot manifestly ought, as in a tragedy, to be constructed on dramatic principles. It should have for its subject a single action, whole and complete, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It will thus resemble a living organism in all its unity, and produce the pleasure proper to it. It will differ in structure from historical compositions, which of necessity present not a single action, but a single period, and all that happened within that period to one person or to many, little connected together as the events may be. For as the sea fight at Salamis and the battle with the Carthaginians in Sicily took place at the same time, but did not tend to any one result, so in the sequence of events, one thing sometimes follows another, and yet no single result is thereby produced. Such is the practice, we may say, of most poets. Here again, then, as has already been observed, the transcendent excellence of Homer is manifest. He never attempts to make the whole war of Troy the subject of his poem. Though that war had a beginning and an end, it would have been too vast a theme and not easily embraced in a single view. If again he had kept it within moderate limits, it must have been overcomplicated by the variety of incidents. As it is, he detaches a single portion and admits as episodes many events from the general story of the war, such as the catalogue of the ships and others, thus diversifying the poem. All other poets take a single hero, a single period, or an action single indeed, but with a multiplicity of parts. Thus did the author of the Cypria and of the Little Iliad. For this reason, the Iliad and the Odyssey each furnish the subject of one tragedy, or at most of two, while the Cypria supplies materials for many, and the Little Iliad for 8, the award of the arms, the Philoctetes, the Neoptolemus, the Eurypylus, the mendicant Odysseus, the Laconian women, the fall of Ilium, and the departure of the fleet. 24. Again, epic poetry must have as many kinds as tragedy. It must be simple or complex, or ethical or pathetic. The parts also, with the exception of song and spectacle, are the same, for it requires reversals of the situation, recognitions, and scenes of suffering. Moreover, the thoughts and the diction must be artistic. In all these respects, Homer is our earliest and sufficient model. Indeed, each of his poems has a twofold character. The Iliad is at once simple and pathetic, and the Odyssey complex, for recognition scenes run through it, and at the same time ethical. Moreover, in diction and thought, they are supreme. Epic poetry differs from tragedy in the scale on which it is constructed and in its meter. As regards scale or length, we have already laid down an adequate limit. The beginning and the end must be capable of being brought within a single view. This condition will be satisfied by poems on a smaller scale than the old epics, and answering in length to the group of tragedies presented at a single sitting. Epic poetry has, however, a special capacity for enlarging its dimensions, and we can see the reason. In tragedy, we cannot imitate several lines of actions carried on at one and the same time. We must confine ourselves to the action on the stage and the part taken by the players. But in epic poetry, owing to the narrative form, many events simultaneously transacted can be presented, and these, if relevant to the subject, add mass and dignity to the poem. The epic has here an advantage, and one that conduces to grandeur of effect, to diverting the mind of the hearer and relieving the story with varying episodes. For sameness of incident soon produces satiety, and makes tragedies fail on the stage. As for the meter, the heroic measure has proved its fitness by the test of experience. If a narrative poem in any other meter, or in many meters, were now composed, it would be found incongruous. For of all measures, the heroic is the stateliest and the most massive, and hence it most readily admits rare words and metaphors, which is another point in which the narrative form of imitation stands alone. On the other hand, the iambic and the trochaic tetrameter are stirring measures, the latter being akin to dancing, the former expressive of action. Still more absurd would it be to mix together different meters, as was done by Chiron. Hence, no one has ever composed a poem on a great scale in any other than heroic verse. Nature herself, as we have said, teaches the choice of the proper measure. Homer, admirable in all respects, has the special merit of being the only poet who rightly appreciates the part he should take himself. The poet should speak as little as possible in his own person, for it is not this that makes him an imitator. Other poets appear themselves upon the scene throughout, and imitate but little and rarely. Homer, after a few prefatory words, at once brings in a man or woman or other personage, none of them wanting in characteristic qualities, but each with a character of his own. The element of the wonderful is required in tragedy. The irrational, on which the wonderful depends for its chief effects, has wider scope in epic poetry, because there the person acting is not seen. Thus the pursuit of Hector would be ludicrous if placed upon the stage, the Greeks standing still and not joining in the pursuit, and Achilles waving them back. But in the epic poem the absurdity passes unnoticed. Now the wonderful is pleasing, as may be inferred from the fact that everyone tells a story with some addition of his own, knowing that his hearers like it. It is Homer who has chiefly taught other poets the art of telling lies skillfully. The secret of it lies in a fallacy, for, assuming that if one thing is or becomes, a second is or becomes, men imagine that if the second is, the first likewise is or becomes, but this is a false inference. Hence, where the first thing is untrue, it is quite unnecessary, provided the second be true, to add that the first is or has become. For the mind, knowing the second to be true, falsely infers the truth of the first. There is an example of this in the bath scene of the Odyssey. Accordingly, the poet should prefer probable impossibilities to improbable possibilities. The tragic plot must not be composed of irrational parts. Everything irrational should, if possible, be excluded, or at all events, it should lie outside the action of the play, as in the Oedipus, the hero's ignorance as to the manner of Laius's death, not within the drama, as in the Electra, the messenger's account of the Pythian games, or as in the Mysians, the man who has come from Tegea to Mysia and is still speechless. The plea that otherwise the plot would have been ruined is ridiculous. Such a plot should not in the first instance be constructed. But once the irrational has been introduced and an air of likelihood imparted to it, we must accept it in spite of the absurdity. Take even the irrational incidents in the Odyssey, where Odysseus is left upon the shore of Ithaca. How intolerable even these might have been would be apparent if an inferior poet were to treat the subject. As it is, the absurdity is veiled by the poetic charm with which the poet invests it. The diction should be elaborated in the pauses of the action, where there is no expression of character or thought, for, conversely, character and thought are merely obscured by a diction that is over brilliant. And with that, I think we'll end this evening's reading from the Poetics of Aristotle. It's interesting to think that things we take for granted in literature and drama were codified more than 2,300 years ago, but Aristotle did just that. If you'd like to read this classic work for yourself, as always, I'll leave a link to a free ebook from Project Gutenberg in the show description. If you'd like to connect, suggest a boring book you'd like to hear read, or request more from one we've already started, the best place to catch me is on Twitter at BoringBooksPod, or drop me an email via our website, www.boringbookspod.com. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Thank you so much for joining me for this evening's reading. Until our next boring book, good night.